There are phases in life when we feel we have spoken too much, explained too much, tried too hard to be understood and accepted. Yet, the more we speak, the further we drift from ourselves. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And indeed, the deepest moments of growth do not come from external noise, but from inner silence. Within that stillness, the soul begins to realign, energy returns inward, and the self, the true essence, begins to speak. In this 1-hour journey, you will walk inward, releasing the burdens of the outer world, letting go of battles that no longer matter, and returning to the quiet center within your own being. You will come to understand why silence is strength, why non-reaction is freedom, and why true peace does not come from outside, but is born from your inner depths. If you are tired of explaining, of having to prove yourself, of the endless external noise, just allow yourself to soften. Lie down. Listen.
The journey back to yourself begins now. 1. The power of withdrawal and silence. There is a subtle truth that most of us fail to recognize for much of our lives. The older we grow, the less we speak. Not because we have nothing left to say, but because we no longer feel the need to waste our energy proving we are right, arguing with those unwilling to understand, or using words as weapons of self-assertion. Carl Jung once wrote a sentence that serves as a compass for the journey inward. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And perhaps only when we know how to withdraw from external chaos and step into inner quiet can we grasp the full power of that statement. In modern life, human beings are surrounded by noise. Not only physical noise, but emotional noise. Expectations, judgments, opinions, comparisons, social pressure.
Everyone is constantly reacting. Reacting to comments, reacting to other people's emotions, reacting to being misunderstood, to the pressure to please, to the fear of being excluded. Living in perpetual reaction means the mind never truly rests, like a lake continuously stirred, never calm enough to reflect the sky. Jung recognized this early on. He did not teach that silence is avoidance or that withdrawal is weakness. On the contrary, he revealed that true strength does not arise from display, but from still presence. In Jungian psychology, psychic energy, libido, always has a direction of flow, either outward to interact, react, compete, resist, or inward to heal, understand, and return to the center of being. When we fall into cycles of defense, explanation, and argument, our energy is flowing outward. When we stop reacting, we begin to reclaim it. Thus, silence, through a Jungian lens, is not merely the absence of sound. It is a state of consciousness, a deliberate act, a decisive gesture. Silence, in its highest meaning, is the refusal to participate in emotional reflex mechanisms, where the ego is constantly fighting to maintain its self-image. Jung pointed out that the ego is obsessed with the need to prove itself, with controlling how others perceive us. But what we try to protect through words is often just a mask, the persona, not the true self. Jung wrote in 2 essays on analytical psychology, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society," meaning the persona is the outer shell constructed to adapt, not the authentic presence of the soul. When we are silent, the social mask loses its anchor. We begin to live more truthfully, even if at first it feels raw, exposed, unfamiliar. We stop trying to prove we are right, stop persuading others to believe us, stop seeking validation. And at that very moment, we begin to return to a different kind of power. Inner power.
This is the energetic shift that Jung saw as foundational to psychological maturation. We no longer live to be seen. We live to be ourselves. Yet there have been moments in our journey when silence made us feel weak. Remaining silent when misunderstood, when dismissed, when invalidated, when accused. We once believed that speaking up was victory, that defending ourselves was strength, that explaining was justice. But over time, we realize that every reaction pulls us into the emotional arena that someone else has set. Our responses, unintentionally, feed the conflict. We become controlled without even noticing. Silence, when practiced as a conscious choice, does the opposite. It drains the fuel from the ego battle. We stop supplying the reaction that others expect. We no longer advance the script they want to play. We cease to perform the emotional character assigned to us.
And then something happens. Others are forced to confront themselves, their insecurity, their anger, their inferiority that they were projecting onto us. In that state, we are no longer controlled by the world. We begin to control the world within. Jung emphasized this in the structure and dynamics of the psyche. The best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our own shadow onto others. Withdrawal, in this sense, is not withdrawing from people, but withdrawing the projections we once cast upon them. No more blame, no more projection, no more searching for external targets. We return to our own center, where the shadow is recognized and integrated. So what happens when we become more silent, less reactive? Our energy transforms from a frequency of conflict to a frequency of observation, from a field of vulnerability to a field of grounded presence. We are no longer swept away by other people's emotional storms.
We stand like a quiet tree in the wind. The branches may tremble, but the roots remain unmoved. Perhaps in the past we feared silence, because silence felt like voicelessness. But after a life of overreaction, we discover that silence is also a voice more mature than speech. Silence does not mean having nothing to say. It means needing no words. And then we realize something profound. People can argue with our words, but they cannot argue with our silence. Words can be rejected, twisted, manipulated, but silence, when it arises from inner stillness, carries a gravitational presence that forces others to hear their own inner voice. In Jung's world, that silence is the point where the self begins to speak. It is the place of awakening. It is the threshold at which we return to authentic power. Not the power to control others, but the power to master ourselves.
2. The flow of energy, from outward direction to the true self. Once we begin to understand that silence is not weakness, but the reclamation of inner sovereignty, another gate of the inner life opens. Mature silence not only creates space externally, it reveals a subtle process internally. The flow of psychic energy begins to change direction. In the first part, we saw silence as a psychological weapon to escape pointless battles. But that was only the surface. Because what is truly important, deeper, more mysterious, is what happens to psychic energy when we stop reacting. Jung, in 2 essays on analytical psychology, wrote, "The libido is not just sexual energy, but psychic energy in general." What he meant is, mental energy, libido, is like a river. It must flow. It always flows. And what matters most is not the volume, but the direction of the flow.
In everyday life, most of our energy flows outward, toward other people, toward social expectations, toward the fear of judgment, toward the fear of abandonment. We expend energy to please others, reply to messages, explain ourselves to avoid misunderstanding, resist the feeling of being judged, maintain a social image, hold on to relationships that have expired. We call this the effort of living. But at the depth of Jungian contemplation, it is energy leakage. We are flowing outward like a river pouring itself into the desert. Perhaps someone once hurt us, and we fell into reaction. We thought of them, resented them, rehearsed imaginary dialogues with them, tried to prove we were not wrong, not inferior, not deserving of such treatment. But all those inner responses, even in silence, were still energy flowing outward.
When we are in such a state, Jung called it living under outer authority, meaning we give decision-making power over our inner state to external influences. Consciousness becomes like a small island, battered by waves of the vast ocean. But then a moment arrives, when we grow weary of being controlled by the world, when we stop talking, stop proving, stop trying, when we stop reacting, when we begin choosing silence, not as withdrawal, but as return. And at that moment, something subtle happens. The libido reverses direction, like a river that once flowed to the sea, suddenly returning to its source.
Energy that once flowed outward now begins to flow inward. Instead of thinking about others, we think about ourselves. Instead of analyzing their behavior, we observe our reactions. Instead of trying to change them, we heal ourselves. Instead of using energy to maintain relationships, we use energy to build our being. Jung wrote in Symbols of Transformation, "The withdrawal of libido towards the inner world is the beginning of the way of individuation." This is one of the core pillars of Jung's philosophy. When the libido returns inward, the journey back to the self begins, meaning the return to the authentic I, the original essence, the source of psychic life, is activated. At that point, instead of letting the world shape our energy, we begin to shape it ourselves. And the transformation does not occur in a dramatic moment.
It happens quietly. We find ourselves less inclined to argue, less inclined to prove, less inclined to persuade, less inclined to explain, less inclined to be right. We even realize that being right matters less than being at peace. We participate less in other people's dramas. We interfere less in other people's journeys. We worry less about other people's thoughts. We care less about how others see us. We return to the state of the observer, no longer the reactor. Jung believed that when energy returns inward, something begins to grow within. Deeper reflections appear. More delicate sensitivities arise. Buried memories resurface. Unconscious parts begin seeking recognition. It is like an inner house, long abandoned, being lit again. Old doors open. Dark rooms become visible. We rediscover ourselves in every neglected corner. Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart."
Only when energy returns to our center can we truly look into our heart, rather than into society's mirror. And at that point, something strange occurs. We begin to need the world less, and the world affects us less. We are no longer dependent on external validation. We are no longer defined by relationships. We are no longer shaped by expectations. The energy is not merely reclaimed, it is transformed. It becomes stronger intuition, deeper creativity, heightened sensitivity, mental clarity, emotional calm. It brings forth a very particular sensation. We feel present with ourselves. This is the experience Jung called realignment with the self. We no longer live like a small satellite pulled by the gravitational fields of others. We become a star with gravity of our own. 3. Silence as the mirror of the unconscious and the shadow.
And then, when the energy turns inward, when the libido is no longer pulled outward by reactions to the world, we enter a phase that is challenging yet deeply meaningful. The phase of confronting ourselves. This is the natural next step of the journey. When we no longer look outward, we must look inward. And it is at this moment that what Jung called the shadow begins to surface from the depths of the unconscious. Jung defined the shadow in a classical way in Aeon. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. This means the shadow is not a psychological trash to be discarded, but a moral test of consciousness, a challenge to the ego. In silence, with no distraction, no scattering, we begin to feel the emergence of parts of ourselves that we once ignored, suppressed, or outright denied.
These may be the fear of abandonment, anger that has been pushed down, humiliation that was never allowed to be expressed, jealousy we never admitted, resentment but was hidden beneath, "I'm fine." Where did these emotions go? They did not disappear. They were pressed into the darkness of the unconscious. When life is noisy, we easily blame others, the world, fate, circumstances. He made me angry. She made me feel inferior. They looked down on me. But in silence, when there is no external screen to project onto, we begin to recognize what Jung said in Psychology and Religion. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What irritates us in others is often the reflection of what we do not accept in ourselves. What we harshly judge in others is often what we fear seeing in ourselves. What we hate in them is often precisely what we forbid ourselves to be. In silence, we sit alone.
There is no one in front of us to project onto, no target to blame, no human mirror to reflect against. And when there is no outer mirror, the inner mirror begins to appear. We realize anxiety is not caused by others. It is an old wound. Anger is not caused by the present. It is a repressed part of the past. Guilt is not society's judgment. It is the sentence we imposed upon ourselves. Jealousy is not because someone is better than us, but because we have not yet become ourselves. In the deepest silence, we hear forgotten whispers. I'm afraid I'm not good enough. I feel I can be easily abandoned. I'm jealous because I haven't lived true to myself. I'm angry because I allowed myself to be treated that way. Silence is not emptiness. It is a vessel, a container for transformation.
Within that vessel, we no longer avoid emotion. We no longer sidestep pain. We no longer deny the darkness. We no longer perform. We no longer wear the persona mask. Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is one of the deepest pillars of Jungian psychology. Growth does not come from trying to stay positive, trying to love ourselves, trying to maintain high vibration. Growth comes from daring to see our dark parts, daring to feel our vulnerability, daring to confront what is unhealed. And here is the key point. Silence is the environment where this becomes possible. Jung did not encourage us to flee from the dark, nor interpret the shadow as an enemy. He regarded the shadow as a legitimate part of the soul, a part that simply needs the light of awareness in order to transform.
In the outer world, we can distract ourselves with work, relationships, entertainment, social media, constant activity. But in the inner silence, there is nowhere to hide. We must look. We must acknowledge. We must converse. We must listen. And strangely, this confrontation does not destroy us. It liberates us. Once the dark parts are seen, they lose their power to manipulate. Anger, when recognized, no longer has the power to explode. Fear, when accepted, no longer paralyzes us. Jealousy, when acknowledged, becomes fuel for personal growth. The shadow, when made conscious, becomes the engine of transformation. We begin to understand. I am not those emotions. I have those emotions. I am not that darkness. I am the one seeing that darkness. The observer, awareness, becomes the anchor. The self, the true center, becomes the new axis. Silence becomes the deepest meditation. Not meditation through technique, but meditation through presence. In silence, we become the mirror. And in that mirror, the shadow appears. Not to frighten us, but to be brought into the light of consciousness. 4. Breaking the cycle of reaction, defense, argument. When the dark parts of ourselves begin to surface through silence, when we start to see what we once avoided, another important truth emerges. Most of our past reactions did not come from the self, but from the ego, from that part of us that fears being hurt, being seen, being judged, being diminished. If part 3 was the process of looking inward, then part 4 is the process of transforming how we interact with the external world at the root level. In daily life, most people are trapped in a behavioral loop that appears normal but is deeply destructive. Being triggered, immediately striking back, being criticized, immediately explaining, being misunderstood, immediately trying to prove, being dismissed, immediately exploding, being abandoned, immediately clinging. We react instantly, almost automatically. Jung called this living under the control of the ego, the defensive, constructed self. In the undiscovered self, Jung emphasized a very important truth. Through pride, we are ever deceiving ourselves. But deep down below the surface of the average conscience, a still small voice says to us, something is out of tune. The ego always believes it is right, believes it is being treated unfairly, believes it is protecting its dignity. But deep beneath, another voice, a subtle awareness, tells us that we are reacting, not choosing. The mechanism of reaction is actually a form of addiction. We are addicted to being right, being heard, being understood, being validated, being protected, being at the center. When we are touched, the ego immediately enters combat mode. I can't let them think wrongly of me. I need to tell them the truth. I won't let anyone belittle me. The ego cannot tolerate ambiguity. The ego fears silence. The ego panics at the idea of losing control of others' perceptions. And so the ego forces us to speak, not to share truth, but to protect the image.
But what Jung recognized is this: the more we protect the image, the further we drift from the self. The harder we try to prove, the more dependent we become on the external world. The more we react, the more we are controlled. This is why Jung stated in Psychological Types, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. And we must add one more to that list: the addiction to reaction.
Silence, then, is not weakness. It is detoxification, a withdrawal from the battlefield, a liberation from the ego's territory. When we choose silence, we are doing something profoundly powerful. We cut off the fuel supply for the egoic conflict. Imagine someone tries to provoke you. They say something that stabs at your pride. They throw a belittling remark at you. They drop a spark to ignite tension. Normally, the ego flares up. Who do you think you are? I'll show you how wrong you are. But if we stay silent, just a calm gaze, a slow breath, a non-reactive presence, then what happens? The other person cannot play their game anymore. They cannot hook your emotions. They cannot remotely control your mood. You have returned responsibility to them, and they must face their own inner turbulence. Jung pointed out in Ion, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Although this quote is commonly attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, Jung used a similar concept in analyzing the shadow and ego. No one can rob you of peace unless you hand them your emotional reins. Silence is the refusal to grant them access to your inner world. Silence is the invisible wall they cannot cross. Silence is the declaration that you are not their puppet. And here is the pivotal transformation. When you stop reacting, you are free. When you stop justifying, you are strong. When you stop arguing, you step out of the ego's power game. Let me say this clearly. Silence is not enduring. Silence is not swallowing. Silence is not shutting down. Silence is walking away from a meaningless battlefield and returning to a higher ground. The ground of the self. And the most beautiful part is that when we are silent, we hear more clearly the voice of the self. We sense more deeply the inner flow of energy. We see more clearly other people's motives. We discern more wisely what deserves a response and what doesn't. That silence becomes a form of clarity. One day we realize, not everyone deserves our energy. Not every conversation is worth sustaining. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every comment requires response. Not every provocation must be won. And this is true freedom. We are no longer slaves of reaction. We become masters of choice, whether to speak, whether to reply, whether to explain. Instead of unconscious reflex, we become intentional. 5. Reclaiming energy and rebuilding inner power. When we begin stepping out of the cycle of reaction, defense, argument, when we stop playing emotional games with others, a subtle yet powerful phenomenon begins to take place inside. A stream of energy that once flowed outward now begins to return. If part 4 was the process of cutting off the fuel to the egoic conflict, then part 5 is the moment we start reclaiming that energy to build our inner world. For much of our earlier lives, we leaked energy without knowing it. Every time we tried to please someone, every time we justified ourselves, every time we were dragged into drama that wasn't ours, every time we tried to fix someone else, every time we asked for validation, every time we were exhausted from fear of being misunderstood. These were the psychological drainage points
the cracks in our energetic container. And then at some point, we pause. We stop participating in the ego's game.
We stop using emotion to purchase acceptance. We stop allowing others to dictate our inner states. And in that moment, a sensation arises, strange, deep, quiet. We begin to return to ourselves within our own body and mind, no longer pulled away from ourselves, no longer living in reactivity, but in presence, no longer being externally puppeteered, but listening to the inner voice. Jung wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the center and the circumference of our totality." This is the core. We stop living from ego. We start living from the self. The ego lives to be seen. The self lives to be present. The ego lives through external approval. The self lives through inner wholeness. The ego feeds on borrowed energy from others. The self feeds on energy returning from within. Those who have gone through this process often say, "I feel steadier. I am less easily pulled.
I no longer feel the need to prove myself. I know who I am." This is the sensation of energy reclamation. We stop spending energy on explaining, arguing, persuading, worrying, predicting others' reactions. We start using energy to feel, observe, listen, heal, understand ourselves. The mind becomes clearer, the inner space becomes wider, the emotions become calmer, presence becomes deeper. We accept an important truth. Not everyone deserves our energy. Not every conversation deserves our engagement. Not every relationship deserves our patience. As the energy returns inward, our aura, our energetic field, begins to transform. Perhaps you've experienced this unconsciously. The person who once belittled you now struggles to look you in the eye. The one who easily dragged you into drama now cannot pull you in anymore. The one who manipulated your emotions now loses that power.
The person who destabilized you now finds you too unaffected. Not because we resist them, but because we no longer supply the energy for them to latch onto. There is a beautiful paradox here. The more we reclaim energy, the less we need to control the world. The more we build inner power, the less we need external power. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." When we live from the self, we are no longer the product of others' words, others' behavior, others' judgments. We are the product of our inner choices. This is the moment when a sovereign energy arises, not the power of domination, but the power of stillness, the power of presence. We no longer demand respect, but respect appears naturally. We no longer crave love, but the right love appears in alignment. We no longer seek understanding, but those of the same frequency arrive.
Because once we live from the self, we emit a new energetic field, strong, clear, unapologetic. Those who belittled us naturally drift away. Those who manipulated us lose interest. Those who were needy stop seeing us as nourishment. Those emotionally dependent find another target. Those aligned step closer. There comes a point in this journey of silence when we realize it's not that we are losing people, we are gaining ourselves. That is the moment the self is reconstructed. Further from ego, closer to self. Further from reaction, closer to presence. Further from seeking permission, closer to self-validation. Further from begging, closer to inner fullness. And finally, we reach a state that is profound, not loud, not theatrical, not displayed. We become our own source of energy. not sucking energy from the outside, not seeking life from someone else's gaze, not fighting for drops of validation, but radiating from within.
6. Silence as a higher language. When we have reclaimed our energy and rebuilt inner power, we enter a more subtle phase. The phase where silence is not merely a psychological state, but becomes a language. If part 5 was about restoring energy and living from the self, then part 6 is when we begin communicating with the world through the frequency of stillness. Here, silence is no longer not speaking. It is no longer needing to speak. Throughout earlier stages of life, there were many moments when we believed that words were necessary. Necessary to maintain relationships, to avoid misunderstanding, to assert identity, to protect our value. But once the self has stabilized, energy has gathered, and the self has been invited to take the central place, we begin to understand something new, that there are truths which can only be spoken through silence. Carl Jung once wrote in Letters, Volume 2, "Silence is not an absence of sound, but a presence with its own resonance."
While this quote is widely circulated and resonates closely with Jung's spirit, most scholars consider it an interpretive paraphrase, not a line from his published works. We include it as wisdom, not as citation. But Jung did say something even more real and powerful in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. His meaning is clear. Human beings will do anything to flee from themselves, and it is our silence that leaves them nowhere to hide. When we no longer react, no longer explain, no longer argue, others are forced to confront their own inner landscape. We no longer swing a sword, we hold up a mirror. In that moment, silence becomes a message. I will no longer trade my peace for someone else's emotional game. No need to speak it out loud. No need to post it online. No need to justify it. Our presence becomes the message. And then the remarkable begins to happen. Chaotic people find it hard to approach us. Manipulators no longer find a hook point. Drama seekers feel they have nothing to extract. Emotional dependents no longer sense us as a free energy source, not because we avoid them, but because we no longer emit a compatible frequency. Conversely, those who are calm, grounded, self-possessed, emotionally mature, attuned to their own inner voice, begin to appear in our life. Not by coincidence, not by luck, not by random selection. This is what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. In Synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle, Jung wrote, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. Those who only see with the outer eye will call it chance. Those who see with the inner eye will recognize the alignment of the soul." When the inner world stands still, the outer world begins to harmonize with it. The call that arrives at the perfect moment. The invitation that appears when needed. The opportunity that shows up when we're ready. A stranger speaking a sentence that matches our inner thought. A book falling into our hands just when we need it. A dream foreshadowing what we are about to face. A separation that happens gently, as if prearranged. Our silence, our energetic field, begins working like a subtle magnet. If in the past we attracted drama, chaos, instability, control, conflict, counterfeit power, now we attract stillness, sincerity, maturity, true connection.
depth, resonance. We no longer seek people to fill our emptiness. We meet the right people because we are no longer empty. Our silence speaks on our behalf. I am enough with myself. I have nothing to prove. I do not need to compete for energy.
I do not need to pull strings in others.
The ego speaks through noise. The self speaks through silence.
The ego needs visibility. The self needs presence. The ego needs reaction. The self needs observation. The ego needs to win. The self needs to rest. And one day, we realize something simple yet profound. The people who remain in our life are the ones who can withstand our silence. Because only souls at peace with themselves can sit beside us, in silence, without discomfort. Many relationships fail because one person requires noise to cover the emptiness within. When we are silent, we hear the essence of the other. And if they are unsettled by our silence, it means they are unsettled by themselves. True silence is a language belonging to a higher dimension of the soul. It is not the silence of fear, but the silence of power. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of freedom.
Synchronicity then is no longer a psychological phenomenon, but becomes the heartbeat of spiritual life. The inner world stands still. The outer world begins to rearrange itself. 7. Solitude and stillness, the psychological womb of rebirth. When silence has become a language, when synchronicity begins operating, and when relationships of mismatched frequency have departed from our life, we enter a new phase, a phase where there are fewer people around us. This is the moment many misunderstand as loneliness. But in the depth of Jung's psychology, this is not pathological loneliness, but solitude, sacred aloneness. If part 6 was living in the frequency of silence, then part 7 is descending into the inner chamber where only we ourselves are present. Carl Jung drew a very clear distinction in archetypes and the collective unconscious. Loneliness does not come from having no one around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Loneliness is when we stand among many people, but cannot connect at the soul level. Solitude is when we are entirely alone, yet connected with the deepest part of ourselves. Solitude does not make us lacking. Solitude makes us whole. Solitude does not create emptiness. Solitude creates space. Solitude does not isolate. Solitude elevates. In that inner space, there is no one left to perform for, no eyes to respond to, no audience, no role, no mask. The persona, the social mask, begins to fall away. Jung described the persona in 2 essays on analytical psychology. The persona is a mask of the collective psyche. It is the character we wear to exist in society. But in solitude, it has no reason to exist. No more pretending to be strong. No more pretending to be fine. No more pretending to be intelligent. No more pretending to be charming. No more pretending to be profound. We're left only with our real fears, our real anxieties, our real wounds, our real dreams, our real longings. All that we once buried begins to surface. This is the time when many people believe they are entering a crisis. But Jung saw something different. He called it the process of psychic rebirth, the restructuring of the self. Solitude is the psychological womb, a cocoon, a chamber of incubation, a place where the old dissolves and the new begins forming. In solitude, dreams become more vivid, memory becomes sharper, suppressed emotions surge upward like springs. Sadness is no longer covered,
Fear is no longer cast into the corner. Forgotten fragments of the soul come forward to be seen. Jung wrote in Man and His Symbols, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." In solitude, dreams are not just unconscious fragments, but messages. They lead us back to the shadow, back to the self, back to ancestral memory, back to the origin of the soul.
Solitude becomes a clinic of the psyche. Not a place of madness, but a place of healing. Here there is no pressure to hold it together, to be strong, to keep moving forward. When it is just us, we can fall apart safely. And precisely in that falling apart, a new structure is being built. This is the stage when the old ego dies, and the self, the true being, is being born. We begin to realize there are parts of our soul that were never loved. There are emotions in us that were never accepted. There are memories locked away too long. There are people from the past still living inside us. There are wounds still breathing with the air of childhood. Solitude allows us to see all of this, without fleeing, without avoidance. And through that process, something miraculous occurs. We do not only see darkness, we see light as well.
Jung wrote in Ion, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality." The self is not only the light, but the total truth of us, both light and shadow. Solitude is where we reconnect with the self. We begin to allow ourselves to feel, allow ourselves to hurt, allow ourselves to grieve, allow ourselves to remember, allow ourselves to soften, allow ourselves to open. We let go, we release, we loosen, and then, as a profound acceptance dawns, we understand. There is nothing in us that must be hidden anymore. There is no part of us that must be denied anymore. There is no emotion that must be concealed anymore. When the persona has fallen, when the darkness has been seen, when dreams have spoken, when memory has reappeared, we begin to become whole again. No longer fighting ourselves, no longer pretending to be someone else, no longer performing,
no longer praising. Solitude does what no relationship can do. It returns us to ourselves. In this aloneness, we are not lonely. We are present with ourselves. We are reunited with the soul. This is not disappearing from the world. This is returning. Returning to the source. Returning to the self. 8. Dialogue with the unconscious and the shift from outer authority to inner authority. In that sacred state of solitude, when the persona has fallen away, when we have dared to look at the shadow and witness the neglected fragments of ourselves, something miraculous begins to happen. We hear the voice of the self. If part 7 was the phase of accepting everything we discover inside, then part 8 is the phase of finally hearing what the unconscious has been trying to communicate. Jung wrote clearly in The Practice of Psychotherapy, "The unconscious mind speaks to us in dreams, intuitions, and symbols." And that is precisely what begins to happen when the mind becomes still, when energy returns to the self. The voice of the external world grows quieter. The voice of the inner world grows louder. We care less about opinions. We care less about judgment. We care less about the roles we used to perform. Instead of asking, "Do people like me?"
Am I behaving correctly? Am I good enough in their eyes? We begin to ask the first question of spiritual maturity. Is this true to my soul? We shift from living under outer authority, authority from outside, to inner authority, authority from within. Outer authority consists of the gaze of others, social mechanisms, cultural trend, the opinion of the majority, recognition, acceptance. Inner authority consists of intuition, felt sense, inner knowing, dreams, internal resonance, soul alignment. This is a revolution in the depths of the psyche. We no longer let the world write our story.
We begin writing that story through the truth of our being. Jung said in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "My life is a story of the self-realization of the unconscious. Not a story society writes upon me, but a story written by the self-awakening of the unconscious." This is when many people begin to live differently. We need less advice. We need less approval. We need less validation. We need less permission. Because we begin trusting our own guidance. The self begins speaking. And it does not speak in sentences. It speaks through imagery, symbols, sensations, meaningful coincidences, flashes of intuition, wordless whispers. For example, one day we suddenly think of someone, and that same day they call. We consider a new direction, and an opportunity related to it appears. We sense a shift coming, and soon after, an old chapter closes. This is not random coincidence. This is synchronicity. Jung called it a language of the universe.
In Synchronicity, he wrote, "Synchronicity reveals the meaningful connections of the unconscious. The universe does not speak in sentences. The universe speaks in alignments. When we live from inner authority, these alignments accelerate. Not because of luck, not because of magic, but because the inner world is moving first, and the outer world follows. When governed by outer authority, we ask, what should I do? What will others think? When guided by inner authority, we ask, who am I? What is true for me? What resonates with my soul? We no longer do things because we should. We do them because they are right for us. And here another shift appears. We fear conflict less. We fear misunderstanding less. We fear abandonment less. Because we are no longer abandoning ourselves. When outer authority rules us, we live according to the script of the crowd. But when inner authority leads, we live according to the script of the self.
Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "The individual is the only real carrier of life." Meaning, society is not the real unit, the individual is. Truth is not authored by the majority, it is authored by each soul living authentically. In this stage, we enter a new kind of maturity, spiritual maturity. It is not mystical or grandiose. It is humility in listening to the self. It is honesty in heeding the inner call. It is courage to live differently when the crowd lives against their own soul. And most importantly, we no longer try to change the world. We change our relationship with the world. We change from within, and the world adapts accordingly. We realize we are not a branch tossed by the wind. We are the roots grounding deeper into the earth. And once the roots are anchored, the wind no longer matters. 9.
Ceasing reaction. Beginning shadow integration. Once we have entered the stage of living from inner authority, once we have begun to trust intuition and the wisdom of the self, a natural consequence unfolds. We stop reacting automatically. If Part 8 is the movement from external authority to inner authority, then Part 9 is the stage in which that authority reveals itself in every living moment. We stop reacting, and we begin observing. Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is the essence of shadow integration, because when we no longer react, we begin to recognize the timeless truth. The person who angers us does not create anger. They merely touch an unhealed wound. The person who evokes jealousy does not create comparison. They reflect a deeper sense of inadequacy.
The person who makes us feel dismissed does not remove our worth. They stir our fear that we are not enough. The person who causes pain is not the source of the pain. They activate the memory of abandonment, rejection, and injury from the past. Reaction ends. The mirror begins to function. At this moment, emotions suppressed for years, anger, shame, envy, hurt, emerge clearly. No longer pushed down, no longer denied, no longer rationalized, no longer covered by the social mask. This is the state Jung calls conscious suffering. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." We choose explosive reaction or avoidance because we do not dare to feel the real pain. But once we have enough inner foundation, we begin to face that pain directly.
We no longer ask, "Why did they do this to me?" but rather, "Why does this pierce me so deeply?" We no longer ask, "How can I make them change?" but, "What part of me needs healing?" And here, transformation begins. Pain is no longer the enemy. It becomes information. Anger is no longer a wound. It becomes a message. Jealousy is no longer a shame. It becomes a guide. The sense of inadequacy is no longer a collapse. It becomes an invitation back to the self. We begin to understand, I am not angry at them. I am angry at myself for not protecting myself in the past. I am not jealous of them. I am jealous of the version of myself I have not yet lived into. I am not afraid of being belittled. I am afraid because I have belittled myself far too often. This is the silent linguistic shift of the soul. Reaction stops. Projection dissolves. Energy returns inward. Because when we react, the energy flows outward.
When we become silent,
The energy flows inward.
In Ion, Jung explained, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We do not grow by telling ourselves, 'Be positive.' We grow by courageously looking into our own darkness. Every emotion once labeled negative now becomes a messenger. Anger? Message. Something is misaligned with my values. Jealousy? Message. There is something I long for but have not pursued. Shame? Message. There is a part of me still unaccepted. Hurt? Message. There is a child in me still unprotected." And once these emotions are acknowledged, they no longer dominate us. We begin living free from emotional reflexes. We no longer burst over trivial triggers. We no longer collapse from a single comment. We no longer crumble from rejection, because we realize we are no longer fighting the darkness. We are integrating it. We say, "I see you. I acknowledge you.
You are a part of me."
This is the state of inner reconciliation. The strange truth is, The shadow never wanted to hurt us. It only wanted to be accepted. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Jung emphasized, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." His meaning is clear. We cannot illuminate life by denying the dark. We illuminate it by embracing the rejected part within the light of awareness. When this happens, a profound shift occurs in our energetic field. We are less easily triggered. We are less easily provoked. We are no longer led by unconscious emotions. We become calmer. We become more sovereign. We become more coherent. This is the foundation of inner freedom. And it is also where true self-love begins. Not the self-love that says, "I am special, I am amazing," but the deeper form of love that says, "There is no part of me that needs to be exiled anymore." 10.
Preserving energy and the emergence of a new field. Once the process of shadow integration has begun, once we no longer react blindly, once we can recognize our emotions rather than being controlled by them, something quiet yet profoundly important begins to take place. Energy begins to return to us. If part 9 is the stage of facing the darkness and embracing it, then part 10 is the stage in which we learn to use that energy consciously, the stage of preserving it and forming a new field around the self. Earlier, we understood that pain is no longer the enemy, but information. And now, the energy that used to be controlled by that pain is liberated to serve the self. Jung wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "Whatever is not conscious will be experienced as fate." In the past, when we lacked awareness, our energy was pulled into unconscious reactions, and we called this destiny, bad luck, life pushing us around. But once consciousness arises, we begin drawing that energy back into our center. We stop arguing. We stop trying to prove ourselves. We stop justifying. We stop attempting to change others. We stop trying to restructure the external world to our preference. And from here, a psychological miracle unfolds. The leaks in our energetic system begin to seal. For years, even a lifetime, our energy has leaked through, trying to please others, reacting to criticism, suffering over the past, exhausting ourselves trying to prove, fearing we may not be loved, endless overthinking and anxiety, pretending to be strong for the world. But now, one channel at a time begins to close, not through effort, but through awareness. When we know we don't need to argue to protect ourselves, energy returns. When we know we don't need to persuade anyone, energy returns. When we know we don't need to respond to everything, energy returns.
When we know we don't need to fix others, energy returns. We begin to feel a new inner calm, not because the world is quiet, but because we are no longer being pulled away from ourselves. At this point, the energetic field around us, once chaotic from constant activation, becomes coherent, stable, grounded. We become a subtle atmosphere of inner influence. Not through words, not through imposition, not through social force, but through presence. In Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When we become ourselves, not only does the psyche transform, but the energetic field around us transforms. Drama no longer pulls us in. Those who thrive on drama no longer have access. Unsettled souls no longer see us as a supply source. Manipulators no longer read us as vulnerable. Not because we push them away, not because we avoid them, but simply because We no longer match the frequency.
We are like a radio tuned to another channel. Drama is on channel A. We are on channel B. The two can no longer connect. This also reshapes our relationships. Toxic people drift away. The emotionally immature step back. Those who once fed on our emotional energy no longer feel attracted. And instead, slow souls draw near. Self-aware souls draw near. People who listen draw near. People who are entering a healing journey draw near. Not because we chase them, but because both are guided to a new shared frequency. This is the stage where we begin to feel intuition growing stronger, inner sensing becoming sharper, creativity expanding, awareness deepening, tranquility in each breath. Because the energy that once bled into conflict now flows into healing, creativity, and awakening. We now have more energy for writing, painting, meditation, artistic creation, learning, contemplation, soul dialogue, living in truth. It becomes a new metaphysics of the soul, where energy is invested into what nourishes the self. We become radiant, not the external kind of radiance, but the quiet inner glow. Not the kind that burns bright, but the kind that warms. Not the kind that displays, but the kind that emanates. This is also when our presence changes the room the moment we walk in. No loudness necessary, no justification, no demonstration. People simply feel that coherence, sometimes without knowing why, and they sense there is something steady in this person, like a rock in the river of life. And within ourselves, that sensation is even clearer. I am no longer being carried by the world. I am the center. 11. Surrendering control, acceptance, and the law of alignment. When the energy field around us has shifted from chaotic to coherent, when the leaks have been sealed, when we are no longer swept into other people's drama, a deeper transformation begins to take place. We start to let go of control. If part 10 was the stabilizing of inner power, then part 11 is more subtle. We are no longer trying to steer the world. We live in harmony with it. Letting go here is not resignation, not apathy, not "I don't care anymore," as many misunderstand. Letting go, in Jung's sense, is the release of the ego's fearful grasp. It is letting go of the story, "The world must unfold the way I want. People must behave the way I expect. Everything must comply with my plan." Jung wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, "We do not cure the ego by making it stronger, but by making it more flexible." Letting go is this inner flexibility. It is the moment we say, "I no longer need to force life to obey me. I trust the process larger than myself. I trust the rhythm of the self and of the universe." We stop clinging, stop demanding, stop forcing, stop pressing, stop insisting. And then, a hidden order begins to reveal itself. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung describes this subtle logic. What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. What we don't understand inside ourselves drags us along as destiny. But once consciousness arrives, control is no longer necessary. Then something interesting happens. We enter what is known as the dark night of the soul, a transitional phase where the old no longer works. The new has not yet taken shape. Old relationships no longer fit. Old social roles collapse. Old motivations vanish. Old meaning dissolves. And yet, the new horizon is not visible. It is an empty space, a corridor of becoming, a phase where there is nothing to cling to on the outside, and only inner guidance remains. Many people panic when passing through this phase,
because the ego loses its anchor of control. But the soul smiles because it knows it is returning to the helm. This is when the self begins to operate more actively. We feel a quiet force steering the inner wheel, not through coercion, not through command, not through loudness, but through an intuitive knowing. In CW11, Jung calls this inner certainty. He writes, "The self is the principle and archetype of orientation and meaning." The self is not merely our essence, it is our compass. It is the orienting field. It is where meaning arises. And when the self takes the wheel, the external world begins to shift accordingly. The people who need to leave, leave. The roads that must close, close. Opportunities whose role is finished, vanish. Old chapters of life seal shut.
But at the same time, the people in the right frequency arrive. New doors open. Synchronicities multiply. Meaningful coincidences begin to appear constantly, not by chance, not by randomness, but by alignment, the coherence between inner world and outer world. Before, the outer world led us. Now, the inner world leads the outer. People begin noticing, life is starting to match me. Everything arrives at the right moment. The right people show up exactly when needed. The knowledge I need finds me. Not magic, not superstition, but the movement of energy in tuned resonance. In Synchronicity, Jung wrote, "The events are connected not causally, but meaningfully. Events do not link through cause, but through meaning. When the ego releases, the self speaks. When the self speaks, the universe responds. When the inner is right, the outer aligns. We enter a new life orientation, not the life of control, but the life of harmony."
Detachment in Jung's sense is letting go of pathological attachment, letting go of the need to control, letting go of dependency on outcomes, letting go of forcing life to follow the ego's script. And in this letting go, we finally discover what Jung always pointed toward. We are not the small boat bobbing helplessly on the waves. We are the ocean. 12. Returning to true power. Wholeness and silence as mastery. When we have released the need for control, when we have allowed life to unfold according to a deeper order, when we have passed through the dark night of the soul and accepted uncertainty as a natural stage of transformation, then a final movement, the most subtle, the most gradual, begins to take place. We return to our true power. If part 11 is the harmonizing with the flow of life, then part 12 is the unification with the very center of the self, the state of wholeness. At this stage, silence is no longer a tool, no longer a strategy,
no longer a behavioral restraint. Silence becomes the nature of presence. We are no longer silent to avoid being hurt, no longer silent to conserve energy, no longer silent to be gracious, no longer silent to appear mature. We are silent because there is no longer a need to speak. Jung once wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "A complete and whole person is one who has integrated both the conscious and unconscious parts of themselves." Wholeness means conscious plus unconscious, strength plus weakness, masculine plus feminine, rationality plus intuition, light plus shadow, all coexisting within a still center.
We are no longer a polarity. We are no longer dominated by one side of our being. We are no longer light battling darkness, or darkness resisting light. We are the entire sky, holding both day and night. This state is individuation, the highest goal in Jung's psychological journey.
In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Individuation is becoming the person you are meant to be. Not becoming who others expect, not becoming what society demands, not becoming the role shaped by our environment, but becoming the version of the soul that was written within us since the beginning." This moment carries a very particular kind of calm, not the forced calm of emotional suppression, not the sterile calm of detachment, but the calm of, there is nothing inside me that is in conflict with itself anymore. The external world still spins as it always does. News, arguments, controversies, conflicts, opinions, judgments. But within, there is stillness. There is a center that remains unmoved. There is an axis untouched by the world. We can enter chaos, but not be consumed by it. We can face conflict without losing ourselves. We can hear criticism without collapsing internally. We can stand before uncertainty and not panic.
Because we have learned how to return to our inner center. Jung wrote in Ion, "The self is the central organizing principle of the psyche. Consciousness, emotions, memories, the unconscious, the shadow, the persona, all orbit the self like planets around the sun. And when we live from the self, something extraordinary happens. We no longer need to prove our worth. We no longer need to convince others to understand us. We no longer need to win any arguments. We no longer need to be right. We no longer need to be seen. We no longer need to be praised. The personal ego becomes lighter, not because it is destroyed, but because it is placed in its rightful position, not as the driver, but as the servant. Silence now is no longer escape. It is the highest form of presence. There are moments when we simply breathe, sit, observe, feel, and it is as profound as a conversation between souls. In that space, we are no longer searching for peace,
Because we are that peace. And when we become peace, our relationship with the world changes. We no longer seek love. Love comes. We no longer seek understanding. Those who understand us naturally arrive. We no longer chase opportunities. Opportunities find their way to us. We no longer search for meaning. Meaning unfolds from within. Here, silence is an energy field. It says, I am enough. I am whole. I am here. I am myself. And others can feel that, not with the ears, not with the mind, but with their energy. A person standing in wholeness does not need to prove anything. They do not need to shout, I am strong, I am profound, I am awakened. Their presence itself speaks it. And finally, we realize something deeply. The goal is not to control the world. The goal is not to avoid suffering. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. Whole, not flawless, not spotless, not without error,
but without rejecting any part of ourselves. We enter the state Jung called the self in harmony. This is where the journey ends, and at the same time where another begins. we step into life as a liberated being, not controlled by the external world, not controlled by memories of the past, not controlled by ego through fear, not controlled by shadow through shame. We live like one who has finally come home. No shouting, no running, no proving, just being, fully and truthfully. If you have listened this far, remember, the silence you choose is not escape, but return. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer need victory or validation. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Peace is no longer something you seek, but something you are becoming. If you feel touched by this journey, please support the channel a little. Press like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what resonated with you most today.
It helps other souls like you discover this space more easily.
Wishing you a deep sleep tonight and a gentle awakening tomorrow.